And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And Joseph went out from the city of Nazareth unto the city which is called Bethlehem, to be taxed with Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child. And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them at the inn. Hello, I'm Peter Jennings, and we have been searching for Jesus. As reporters, that is, because it's an irresistible story. And whatever your faith or religion, there's simply no denying the extraordinary influence that Jesus has had, that he does have in people's lives. We've tried to be respectful about what people believe as we have gone in search of what we can know about Jesus, the man. We found a real person. We suspected that reliable sources would be hard to come by, and sometimes they were, as we found early on. We ended up one day at a news conference in a grove of olive trees just outside Bethlehem.
We believe that this site can be developed both as a touristic site and as a pilgrimage site, a major pilgrimage site.
Israeli government archaeologists and the Greek Orthodox Church were announcing an important new discovery. They had uncovered a rock where they say Jesus' mother Mary, pregnant and tired, sat and rested on the road to Bethlehem.
Faithful, but speaking as an archaeologist, do you believe that Mary sat on that rock?
I can assure you whether she sat exactly in this piece of rock, but for sure it happened somewhere in these surroundings.
Now, no one here could tell us where they got the information about Mary sitting on the rock, and there's nothing in the Bible about Mary sitting anywhere.
What is your indication that this is the real place that Virgin Maria rests?
Right here we realized just how difficult it would be for a journalist to get the story right. It turned out that what the archaeologists had actually uncovered here was the foundation of a church with a big rock in the center. The church was built 300 or 400 years after Jesus lived by converts to Christianity, who'd come here and were told by the local people that this was where Jesus' mother supposedly sat down. We went into Bethlehem itself because we obviously wanted to hear what the local people there had to say about the birth of Jesus, or about his parents, Joseph the carpenter, and his pregnant fiancée, Mary.
When they saw her belly was bigger and bigger, they asked her, from where that came? You are not married. She said, it's from the Spirit of God.
The angel come from the sky and tell them that there's a baby born in Bethlehem.
This man is from a little village down the road where he told us the angels appeared to announce Jesus' birth to some shepherds. Again, the only evidence this happened here is another church, built about 400 years after Jesus lived. Do you believe the story?
Why?
Because we are Christian.
Why not?
We must believe.
Why not?
And of course, we went to the enormous Church of the Nativity, which sits at the very center of Bethlehem.
This is the church where everybody thinks Jesus was born?
Yes, it's the real place where Jesus was born.
Well, as far as anyone knows, for about 300 years after Jesus was born, there was nothing marking this as the site of the manger. For most of that time, there were no churches at all. Christians were being persecuted throughout the Roman Empire. until the Roman Emperor Constantine converted to the faith and sent his mother, Queen Helena, here to build churches.
That's the place where Christ was born. The star is a symbol of the Star of Bethlehem, and it marks the holy place where Christ was born. And this cave used to be the stable.
The local people apparently told Helena that this was the place where Mary laid the baby in a manger and where 3 kings or wise men knelt to worship him.
And there's the altar where the 3 kings gave to Christ the Lord the 3 presents.
And so this sprawling sanctuary tells us a lot about the enthusiasm of 4th century Christians, but not very much about the life of Jesus. One of the first things we learned when we started this was that all but the most skeptical historians believe Jesus was a real person, even though when you come here you do not find any physical evidence. What everybody starts with is this: the New Testament of the Bible. The New Testament provides us with bits and pieces about Jesus' life, and most of it about the last couple of years. And so we took the book and we went to talk to biblical scholars and historians and archaeologists. Many of them are Christians, some of them are priests or ministers, others studied for years in seminaries. We also talked to Jewish experts, of course, because Jesus was a 1st century Jew. As we listened to these men and women, we came to realize that the debate about Jesus the man and his teachings is as vigorous and exciting today as it has been in any century. And the disagreements begin right at the beginning. Do you think there was a star in the east?
I think the star is purely legendary and symbolic.
The shepherds may have been, relatives who were out in the fields, and word was sent to them that a relative had a child, and there was great rejoicing, and they came back. I don't think it was angels, and I really don't think there were 3 wise men.
Scholars told us early on that they don't take everything they read in the New Testament literally, because the New Testament has 4 different and sometimes contradictory versions of Jesus' life. The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. There is no reliable evidence about who the authors actually were. It is pretty much agreed that they were not eyewitnesses. In fact, the Gospels were probably written 40 to 100 years after Jesus' death. So reading the Gospels as part of the search for the historic life of Jesus, how much should I rely on them?
You can rely on them as the place to start, as the place where you know you're in touch with this is what people really thought really happened. Of course, like any historical task, the historian has to say, but how does this fit with everything else that's going on? Where does the archaeology come in? What about the other documents that aren't in the New Testament?
So scholars are very careful when they cite the Gospels. On the question of where Jesus was born, only 2 Gospels even talk about it, and they tell it differently.
In Luke, of course, we have the famous story of them living in Nazareth, but needing to go to Bethlehem for the census, and that's why Jesus is born in a stable, in a manger, because there's no room in the inn. In Matthew, and this is one of the most striking differences, the family apparently lives in Bethlehem, and Jesus is born at home.
To get the whole nativity scene that we're all familiar with, you have to put the 2 stories together. Only Luke has the shepherds and the angels, and only Matthew has the kings and the star. Much of the information that we have about this part of the world in the 1st century does not support either gospel story. Take the Gospel according to St. Luke. Luke writes that Joseph and Mary came here to Bethlehem from Nazareth because the Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus had ordered a worldwide taxation. Now, there is no record outside the Gospels that the Emperor Caesar Augustus ordered such a tax. Roman tax records do show that a man is to be taxed where he lives and where he works, and Joseph lived and worked in Nazareth. Tax records also show they didn't count women. And so why would Joseph have brought Mary on this very difficult journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem through the desert, especially when she was very pregnant?
In all likelihood, Jesus was born in Nazareth and not in Bethlehem.
On what basis do you think he was born in Nazareth?
The fact that Jesus is known as Jesus of Nazareth points very, very heavily to Nazareth being his birthplace. People in that world were known either as son of so-and-so or by the village in which they were born.
We got two sides here. One commemorates the birthplace and one commemorates the manger.
But if Jesus wasn't born in Bethlehem, why would the gospel writers say that he was? A lot of scholars point to the Old Testament of the Bible. The Old Testament prophecies say that God would someday send a Messiah, a Jewish leader, to rid the world of violence and injustice. The gospel writers believe that Jesus was the Messiah, and the Old Testament says the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem.
Look at me again now.
By the way, here's something else we learned very early on. Jesus scholars often disagree with each other even when they're looking at exactly the same evidence.
As far as I'm concerned, Jesus was born in Bethlehem. If we only had Matthew's gospel, everyone would assume that Mary and Joseph were natives of Bethlehem.
Father O'Connor dismisses Luke's story about the census and relies instead on Matthew's gospel. Matthew has the family fleeing Bethlehem and ending up in Nazareth after the local Jewish king Herod ordered that all the baby boys in Bethlehem should be massacred.
Bethlehem was the most unfortunate village in the whole of the territory of Herod because it was named in a prophecy of the Old Testament as the place from which would come a warrior king. Now, as Herod's rule continued and he got older and sicker, violence began to bubble up. And so it became more repressive. His secret police were everywhere. So they were keeping a very close eye on Bethlehem, and anyone who stepped out of line, Herod would have demolished the whole village without any scruple. So everybody knew what could happen. And that's why Joseph decided, let's get out of here until the king dies.
So this, it turns out, is what all the scholars do. They look at the stories and the other available evidence. They choose what they think makes the most sense historically, and then they make educated guesses.
People are looking for mathematical or scientific proof. In history, that doesn't exist. What we're looking for is likelihood, possibility, plausibility, stuff like that. And in history, that's as far as you get, that's as good as you get. And when it comes to the birth narratives, no, I can't say it's even probable because it remains highly improbable that things like this happen. However, I know as a historian that history is full of things which were improbable at the time, and yet, my goodness, they happened.
Why do you think Jesus was born in Bethlehem? Why here?
This is something, why I born here, I don't know.
We talked to people in Bethlehem about all this scholarly analysis, and they were not impressed.
Where you born? You?
Toronto.
What?
Canada.
Canada, why?
Do you know some scholars, some teachers, they think that Jesus was actually born in Nazareth.
Where?
Nazareth.
Nazareth? No, he lived in Nazareth. He born here. He born here. Who tell you that is not correct. He here in Bethlehem.
And for generations, people from all over the world have come to Bethlehem to celebrate the birth. One thing almost everyone we talk to agrees on is that the religious power of these stories, including the birth stories, doesn't depend on whether they can be verified.